Good day, students. Today we will be doing a course on research methodology, and the topic for discussion today is Abul Fazl and his Akbarnama. As we all know that the Mughal period is one of those periods when we had a flourish of different kinds of historical materials, and within this, the Akbarnama of Abul Fazl is one of the most significant sources. We will be doing this particular lecture in several segments. We have an outlook on what kind of history writing was going on during the Mughal period, and within this, what was the role of Abul Fazl's Akbarnama within that historiography? How has this particular historical text been looked at by historians across time? And also, we will be looking at another segment which is on Abul Fazl's biography, his relationship with Akbar, and also how he was trying to figure out a new kind of relationship between the Mughal ruler and the historical writing of that period. We will also have a look at how this particular text has played a significant role in the later historiography, and the structure, the limitations, and also the important segments of this book will be covered by us in today's discussion. As we all know that the Akbarnama is considered to be one of the most historically important documents of the Mughal period. It was written in the 1590s, and this particular document, which we know as the Akbarnama, is one of those documents which has an immense significance, not just for the perspectives about the royalty of the time, not just an attitude of Akbar which is reflected in that document, but also broadly the significance of historical writings in that period also got reflected in this particular text. So we can also imagine that this particular text has been considered of a genre which is known as the Nama, or it reflects the fame, the popularity, and also the glory of a particular ruler's reign. And this particular tradition or genre was imported into India from Iran. So the Nama genre, which is considered to be one of those which brought down from the Shahnama tradition of Firdausi, is one of those significant improvements in the historiography of India in the medieval times. The historical context of this particular text will also be taken up by us during our discussion. The third segment of this particular text, which is also known as the Ain-i Akbari, is one of those important segments which refers to the administrative rules of Akbar, the emperor of the Mughal Empire. So the 16th century plays a very significant role in the historiography of India. The Akbarnama, however, is not just a narrative. It is not just a historical narrative, but also an illustrated manuscript. And as such, there are around 116 illustrations in this particular text, which has been drawn by various painters of the Mughal period. And as a result, we have a very powerful visual document also, not just a historical narrative, but also a very important visual narrative of the Mughal Empire in this particular text. Now, the Mughal period was also one of those times when we have a variety of historical writings being done during that period. We have a new concept of history writing which comes up, and I will dwell a little on the historical consciousness of the period as well. The most dominant feature of the historical writing of this period is the history writing tradition of the royal chroniclers or the official court historians of the period, and Abul Fazl is one of them. So we will also understand that the court historical materials, which began from the time of Akbar, continued during the time of Jahangir, Shah Jahan, and into the time of Aurangzeb. So this was one of the most popular traditions. But there was also another segment of autobiographical writings which came up during the Mughal period, and these autobiographical writings by the Mughal emperors themselves referred to important historical attitudes and also reflected the literary standards of the particular emperors. For example, we have Tuzuki Babari, which was written by Babur. It was in Chagatai Turki language, and later it was translated into Persian during the time of the great emperor Akbar. And we also have the Nama by Jahangir during that period. But apart from these official histories, we also have independent scholars who were contributing to the historical writings of the period. And for example, we have the Tabaqat-i Akbari being written by Nizamuddin Ahmed. We also have the Muntakabut Tawarikh being written by Abdul Qadir Badayuni. So these were independent histories which were happening during this period. A particular feature of this particular period was the history writing and historical consciousness that grew up depending on historical documentation. So there was an increasing documentation which was emphasized on by the Mughal emperors. And the centrality of the Mughal lineage, the dynasty, in the writing of histories became more prominent from the pre-Mughal period. So the tradition of history writings that used to happen during the Delhi Sultanate was gradually changing as we move on to the Mughal period. Finally, we also find an emphasis on collation of data, of survey methods being used, and different kinds of statistical information being collated into such a document. And the Akbarnama and the Ain-i Akbari is one of those documents where we find that all these kinds of materials were collated. Akbar's reign also saw the initiation of a new kind of narrative. For example, we find the Tariq-i-Alfi, which was one of those texts which tried to cover almost 1,000-year history of Islam from the death of the Prophet down till 1585. This was one of those texts which were instituted by Akbar in the 1580s. So by the 1580s, when we have a translation department being established, we have a new trend of history writing happening, and this contributed to a new historical consciousness that is reflected in these texts. Now, history writing, as we usually know, is an individual venture. But in the Mughal period, we also find a new mode of collaborative historical writing. So we have a bureau which was established by Akbar, with not just the translation bureau, but also a historical bureau where we have different kinds of historians collaborating and contributing towards the creation of a particular historical text. The Tariq-i-Alfi was one of those texts which was collaborative in nature. But after it was written, we find that Akbar was not satisfied with the way in which the emperor was portrayed in this particular text. So he requested his confidant, Abul Fazl, to create a new history, and this particular history was instituted in 1589, and it continued over the course of the next decade or so till 1598. So over the course of the 11 years, we find that the Akbarnama was shaped, reshaped, and then again we find it was redrafted. In fact, we noticed that there were around 5 drafts which were presented in court. Akbar oversaw these, the courtiers listened to them, and then their suggestions were incorporated as well. So we have a new kind of history writing taking place during this period. Now, how has this particular text been perceived by later generations of historians? The Akbarnama, as we have already mentioned, is one of those texts which are considered to be seminal. It is one of those important texts which contributed to the importance of history writing during the Mughal period. The Akbarnama is usually considered to have a special importance within Mughal historiography. And we find that it was so important that it became almost the standard for later day historians. In fact, in the 17th century, when the Badshah-Nama was written by Abdul Hamid Lahori, he also followed on the footsteps of Abul Fazl. So Abul Fazl's Akbarnama was setting the standard, so to say, of Mughal history writing during that period. And in the colonial period, we find that this particular text was translated from Persian into English for the first time. And in the history of India as told by its own historians, which was a book comprising of translations of different Persian texts of the medieval period, which was done by Henry Myers Eliot, and later it was edited by John Dawson. This particular text was also featuring in that particular book. A multi-volume translation of the Akbarnama was instituted in around 1897 by Henry Beveridge, and he analyzed the core of the text. Others during that period, for example, John Blockman, was also focusing on Abul Fazl's biography. In the 20th century, we have a spate of Indian scholars, for example, S.R. Sharma, K.A. Nizami, Sayyid Athar Abbas Rizvi, and Mohibul Hasan, among others, who tried to look at different aspects of this particular text. And they have emphasized on two basic points. One point was to locate the Akbarnama's significance within the broader context of history writing in the medieval period, and also to look at the departures that this particular text had from other texts of the period. The second point which they emphasized was to look at the unique position of the ideological perspectives that were displayed by Abul Fazl as an imperial chronicler. While most historians, for example, those belonging to the Aligarh school, for instance, Irfan Habib or Muhammad Athar Ali, and among others, tried to look at the Akbarnama as a core text, as a text which reflects the historical reality of the Mughal Empire and the unitary, institutionalized, and centralized character of the Mughal Empire was reflected in this particular document. There are several other historians also, for example, the revisionist scholars like Sanjay Subramaniam, Muzaffar Alam, who emphasized that the book was ideologically loaded, and these viewpoints had a didactic purpose rather than a historical, factual understanding related to it. Therefore, the Akbarnama is considered to be an important segment, an important text, which has been looked at from various angles by different kinds of historians. If we now turn to Abul Fazl's biography and what role he played in the Mughal Empire, we find that he was born in around 1551 as the second son of Sheikh Mubarak, who was a renowned teacher and scholar of the time, who migrated to Agra, the new imperial city which was coming up during the Mughal period from Rajasthan. And although Abul Fazl grew up in this newly founded Mughal capital, he was initially not attracted to the Mughal court. In fact, his brother Abul Fazl was a poet, a very renowned poet who was already part of Akbar's retinue in the Darbar. But till 1574, we do not find Abul Fazl entering the court. Instead, Abul Fazl applied himself to a rigorous life of educational pursuit, and under the supervision of his father, Sheikh Mubarak, he went on to study Islamic theology, Persian and Arabic, Greek philosophy, and Sufi theology. So Abul Fazl's career has been divided by historians into two basic aspects. One was the pre-1574 period, when we find that Abul Fazl, along with his father Sheikh Mubarak, were persecuted because of their Mahdawi beliefs. And in the later period, we find from 1574 onwards, he became a part of the Darbar, he became a part of the Mughal Empire, and his intimacy with the Mughal king Akbar grew at a rapid pace. From 1574, he entered the service, as we have just mentioned, and he increasingly became not just a historian, but also an officer, a chief secretary, and a personal confidant of the Mughal emperor. He was murdered in 1602 by Prince Salim, by the machinations of Prince Salim, who was the later Jahangir, and because he thought that the imperial ambitions of his own could not be served if he was around for a longer time. So he had his father's confidant murdered by his associates. Now, if we look at the structure and contents of the Akbarnama, then we find that Abul Fazl wanted to divide this particular text into 4 parts, each part containing 30 years of Akbar's life. But at Akbar's instance, we find that this was changed, the structure was changed, and we find a new structure which comes up in the 1580s, wherein we find there are 2 volumes of the Akbarnama, and the 3rd volume becomes the Ain-i Akbari. The first volume refers to Akbar's birth, his upbringing, the history of the Timurid dynasty, the role that Babur and Humayun played. The second volume refers to those important policies which were undertaken by Akbar during his rule. And the third segment, which was the most important segment, most important in the sense that we have a spate of statistical information which was collated within this particular segment. It is subdivided into 5 parts. The Ain-i Akbari contains the history of the imperial establishment, the various departments which were established. The book 2 deals with the army, its divisions, rules of payment, and other aspects. Book 3 deals with the qualities of men appointed as faujdars, as other administrators of the period. The 4th book refers to the various religious and philosophical systems of the Hindus, including their astronomical, medicinal, and other aspects. And the 5th and the final subsegment refers to the wise sayings of Akbar. And this is something which we have a direct information about what Akbar was like, what his attitudes were. These are reflected in this particular text. So the Akbarnama is a massive effort in remembering, in commemorating, and in synthesizing the history of the Mughal period. And we find that Akbar, as a ruler, was directly engaged in the writing of the book. He was hearing it in court, he was suggesting changes to it, and that is why we find that there were 5 drafts which were finally submitted, and the ultimate was done in 1598. The historical methodology of the Akbarnama, if we turn to that, then we find that just like later-day historians depend on the archive, we find that Abul Fazl was depending on the Kanun-e-Waqiya-Navis, that is the court record room, which was established in 1574. Abul Fazl was given a bureau. He was given a number of staff members to work on different aspects of collating the history. And we find that Akbar had also instituted an opinion to his courtiers and to his predecessors to collate the information of the preceding period. So we find that is the reason why Gulbadan Begum, who was Babur's daughter, wrote the Humayun-Nama, thereby collating a vast historical knowledge for disposal, which was used by Abul Fazl. Above all, Abul Fazl's personal relationship with Akbar also played a very significant role in this writing. K.A. Nizami, one of the historians who has looked at Abul Fazl's importance, showcases the fact that Abul Fazl's Akbarnama is a memorial and a gratitude to Akbar. He took daily interest in the way the text was developing, and he was also suggesting changes, as we have mentioned. Abul Fazl tried to blend religion, politics, and society in one whole, and he put the king, that is Akbar, at the center of it. That is why K. Nizami states that the intertwined pattern which was woven by Abul Fazl's scholarly genius is thoroughly original but painfully unreal. Abul Fazl tried to bring out the importance of Akbar not just as a ruler but also as an emperor prophet, and he tried to portray him in the fashion of an insan-i-kamil, or a perfect man of the universe. So as far as Abul Fazl's approach is concerned, we find that he adapted the Mongol and the Timurid tradition of historians like Wassaf and Rashiduddin Fazlullah, rather than the simple prose which was popular during the Delhi Sultanate. For example, the works of Minhaj siraj, the Tabaqat-i Nasiri, or Ziauddin Barani's Tarikh-i Firuz Shahi. The Mongols considered the use of exaggerated ornamental language as one of the marking features of a historical text. And as such, the literary perfection of this particular kind of emphasis on language, in fact, that came out more within this text than the historical aspects. So in a similar manner, Abul Fazl tried to state in the Akbarnama, he tried to treat the mysteries of truth in a cryptic language, which is considered as the Zaban-i Gomago by K.A. Nizami. So he was not actually a conventional court historian. He was also trying to innovate, and he was trying to give new aspects to this particular text. According to historians who have studied the text, they tell us that the Abul Fazl's Akbarnama is one of those documents which tried to portray the king not just in the Islamic ideology of an Islamic ruler. He was trying to broaden up the base. He was trying to give new emphasis to royal authority, to kingship, and he tried to focus on Akbar as a perfect ruler, as an insani kamil and an imam-i adl, that is a perfect judge. And he tried to focus on Akbar's importance, not just to the Muslims of India, but also to the Muslims and the Hindus of Hindustan. So we have a gradual development of a new kind of history writing with Abul Fazl. In fact, Abul Fazl also mentions that the unity, the stability, and the economic prosperity of the time was dependent on Akbar's role. So Akbar was becoming like a cog. He was becoming the central focus of this particular document, is what we find. Now, if we turn to the limitations of the work, then we can notice that despite its historical value, Akbarnama has a bias towards its patron. And we find that the adulatory tone which was used is trying to showcase the positive sides of the emperor without emphasizing anything about his failings. So subjectivity and flattery are two aspects which are found in this particular work. The Ain-i Akbari abounds in economic details. As we have stated, statistical details are filled within this book. But the life and conditions of the masses, the people who toiled on the fields, the people who worked in the cities, that is not reflected in this particular text. Moreover, Abul Fazl has also been charged by later-day historians to be someone who suppressed facts, who used the facts which were mentioned by others. Today, it would be some sort of plagiarism, which we may consider that it was a sort of plagiarism that was going on, but during those periods, it was considered to be pretty normal. Abul Fazl doesn't mention many events or facts, and this is also one of the failings of this particular text. In fact, it has been mentioned by many that the historian doesn't come across as a person who is able to notice the spirit of the age in all its entirety. In fact, Akbar's attitude became enmeshed with the attitudes of Abul Fazl to such an extent that we find that this text was limited in its scope. So if we turn to the conclusion, then we can notice that the Akbarnama is one of those significant texts which remained the most important historical sources of the time. Abul Fazl deserves mention for being extremely extensive in his approach. The collection of material, the database, and the way in which he analyzed the emperor was something which was extraordinary for the times. In fact, as we mentioned a little while ago, the text became almost seminal in its status. Others tried to emulate its standard. And among medieval historians, we may also mention that Abul Fazl can alone claim to have written a text which was rational, which was secular, and which was liberal in its approach at the same time. Akbarnama paved the way for the widening of the scope of history writing during the medieval period. So, as we have mentioned, Abul Fazl's Akbarnama was one of those important texts which began to create a departure from history writing in the pre-Mughal to the post-Mughal phase. And one of those important Persian texts was this particular document, and that is why we remember Abul Fazl as someone who contributed a lot to the making of medieval historiography in India. Thank you so much.